So my name is Seema Kenney, and I am a professional genealogist for the past 15 or 20 years now. I'm here tonight to talk to you about using the census reports for genealogy, or family history, whichever you want to call it. And not just looking up names and finding out who lived with grandma and grandpa, because that's interesting, but there are so many more stories you can get if you read the whole page, right? And these are big pages. They're 11 by 17 in the original format. So when you look at them on your computer, you know, you got to scroll over, you got to look at all the good, interesting stuff. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about why the census was created, when it was taken, and different types of census reports. There's been 3 different types over the years since 1790. We'll definitely address some of the issues with how the census was taken. Can you imagine taking a census in January? Yes, they did that once, back before they had cars and you had to walk through the snow. Do you think they made a few mistakes? I have some sample research to show you based on looking up my great-grandfather on all the censuses that he made, because he was born just in time to get that 1880 census. So he's on the 1880. I have him all the way through 1950. And I'll give you some ideas of where to find the census reports, and then what do you do with all the little hints that you get? How do you go find more information? So, of course, the census was not created for genealogy. It was around back then. They just weren't thinking about it back then. It was created to tell the government how many people needed to have seats in Congress. All right? It's created every 10 years to provide a snapshot of what does the nation look like. And I think if I ever get around to it, maybe someday if I ever retire, I think one of the more interesting things to read from Congress might be when they discuss what questions are going to be on the next census, because some of them are really kind of far out there. Must have been about 15 years ago, I was just getting started learning about the 1940 census because it was going to come out. It had been 72 years. And somebody that was talking to us about it said, oh yeah, well, one of the questions they thought about asking was, do you own a waffle maker? Now, why would the government care? I don't have an answer. It's a very rhetorical question, but you know, so I think some of those conversations and records of deciding what questions they're going to ask could be very interesting. Now, we think of the census in our lifetime, it's April 1st, census date, because most of us between 1930 and 2020, it's always been on April 1st, but it was not always on April 1st. And I have some sets of dates circled here just to show you that a lot of times it was not even exactly 10 years apart. So if you do find census reports for your family, and you're like, I think it's my family, but the ages are a little bit off, that might be okay, all right? Because between April and January, there's not a full 10 years. People are only going to be 9 years older, not 10. But if you've got all the right names, well, except maybe if you're in a French-Canadian family, because, you know, every French-Canadian family is Joseph and Mary with kids Joseph and Mary and more Josephs and Marys. But if you can tell that you've got approximately the right names in approximately the right place, you just want to be aware that it may not be every 10 years. And then, of course, there may be the other ones from January to April. You could have people that aged 11 years. You never know. Always have to do some math. Oh, this one's going to be a pain. So there's 3 types of censuses that you can deal with for genealogy. Now, I'm going to give them to you in the order they were created, which means this nasty one is the one you're going to get to last, because we usually work backwards. But 1790 to 1840 was heads of household only. Sorry, ladies, but that means that they are 95% men, right? We don't count. We're not on there. Well, we are on there as a little tick mark. You know when you used to count things and you do 4 little marks and put a hash mark? And yeah, well, that's kind of what the census looks like in this date range. Now, in 1850, the government was growing up, right? It's still a little bit of a baby. The federal government's only been around for 60 years at this point. But it was growing up, and there was talk of needing data to figure things out. So they actually decided, oh, we're going to put everybody's name on the census. But it wasn't until 1870 that they decided, oh, well, now we're going to list the relationships of all the people in the house. So don't always assume, oh, male, female must be husband and wife. Not necessarily. One of the things that you can do with all of these censuses is you can go and get the actual instructions that the enumerators were given. I have a big thick book with all of them printed out. And you can make some assumptions. I know that's a dangerous thing to do, but if you're trying to explain why you think this family is the right family, and the instructions said, oh, you list the husband, the wife, typically the instruction would then say, you know, think the Brady Bunch, you list their kids, then you list the husband's kids, and then you list the wife's kids from previous marriages. So if you look at some of those kind of rules, you can maybe decide, oh, I have a couple more hints as to why I think this is the right family. Just remember, there's no guarantees. We're not looking for perfection in genealogy. You do your best. You outline your logic, you outline your arguments as to why these are the right people. And when somebody takes down the barn around the corner and down the street and they find all the original newspapers in the barn wall, you have to say, well, I didn't know they were in the barn wall, so I didn't look at them. And you have to be willing to live with that. Now, starting in 1940, I got to update this slide. They now ask for who answered the questions. When the 1940 census first came out, I sat there almost every night looking people up on the census, and I would always go to my husband, oh, so-and-so lied. Oh, I know she lied about this. I know they lied about this. He just kept looking at me like, if it's all full of lies, why are you even reading it? I'm like, because it's fun to see what they lied about and what they said. You know, any mother-in-law who says that the daughter lived there 5 years ago when they've only been married for 6 months must like the daughter-in-law. Because if she didn't like the daughter-in-law, she would have sure as heck said, oh no, she wasn't living here. I mean, maybe it's a bad assumption, but I figure, you know, if I didn't like my daughter-in-law, I would say, no, she didn't live here 5 years ago. Now, starting in 1940, we also have separate sections where certain people, because of where they fall on the page, get asked extra questions. So instead of everybody being asked the same questions, you get some variety. If you're like me, it's very rarely your family that gets asked the extra questions. On the 1950, my grandfather got asked the extra questions. He said no to everything or left them blank. So I'm like, no help here, Grandpa. But what can you do? I wasn't there. So people did move around. They may not have gotten counted if they weren't home. People might have gotten counted twice because enumerators didn't always understand the directions. Anybody here ever done an enumerator, been an enumerator for a census? Walked around and got information? A lot of the instructions actually say, well, if you try 3 times and they're not home, you can put down your best guess. Or you can ask the neighbors. I don't know, what kind of nationalities do we have in Southbridge? Probably a lot of French Canadians. Right? Yeah. So what if your neighbor speaks French and you don't, and you're not home, and the French person tries to answer your question? I mean, I don't know. We have 2-acre lots on my house, on my street. I can barely even see my neighbor's house from mine. Never mind, have I ever told her who my father was and where was he born, and you know everything they asked on the census. So it was a different time. Borders have changed, whether it's the town, the county, or the state. Borders have changed, so make sure that when you're looking for the census, you're getting the right location, especially along, you know, the Massachusetts border, because I think it's as recent as the 1930s that Massachusetts border finally got settled between Massachusetts and Rhode Island. There was still some back and forth going on. People could change their name because they didn't have picture IDs, right? So don't be surprised if you all of a sudden find another name. Oh, well, if the neighbor answered and the neighbor's always called him Buddy and doesn't even know that his real name is George, you're not going to find George on the census, are you? You know, there's all kinds of crazy things. So you're the census taker, you go out all day, you get all this information from the neighbor, you get home, you're exhausted. Oh crap, but I got to make 2 copies of all the pages I wrote today. Who's going to make the copies? Who needs to practice their handwriting? Mom and the kids. Expect some transcription errors. If you find 2 copies of the same census, don't be surprised when things are spelled a little differently. Remember as a kid trying to read your parents' handwriting? Mom, is this an I or an E? I still can't read my mother's handwriting, so you know. And don't forget that there's no rule about everybody has to be on one page. So if you're looking at somebody at the top or the bottom of a page, always make sure you look at the previous or the next page. And I'll show you some of those. Probably one of the most important things to look at when you first get a census report is this date at the upper right-hand corner of the page. That is the date that the person actually sat down with your ancestors and asked the questions. They didn't always get there on April 1st. Sometimes there's actually one census out in California that took them almost 2 years to complete. Well, yeah, they had an earthquake and, you know, a few hundred other things that got in their way. So you want to make sure you're looking at this date. Because when somebody's sitting in your living room and they're asking you all these questions, even though they said to you, I need to know the answers as of January 1st, April 15th, whatever the date was, I don't know. Did grandma die before that date? After that date? Was the baby born before or after the date? You know, they didn't care about dates. They didn't have calendars on every wall the way we do, or in their pockets, on their wrists, wherever we take them. They would have given it their best guess. And good thing they answered, so at least we got their best guess. You also want to look at the top and say, okay, well, what state, county, and city is this for? Right? Especially if you're near one of those borders. And then if you're in a big city, you want to look for this ED, or enumeration district. All right? When we're supposed to do a census, even when they had to do them by hand, they had a very limited time that they were supposed to get it done. We won't say they 100% made it, but they were supposed to do it fairly quickly. So in a big city, they split the city into districts that could be covered within 2 weeks. Because don't forget that in the city, they have to go all the way up the apartment building to every floor and back down and make sure they caught every single apartment in that one building before they go to the next building. Right? You can't get a whole lot of those done in 2 weeks. Just not physically possible. So there are some of these enumeration district maps that still exist for the larger cities that can help you to figure out on a map exactly where these people lived. All right, so I'm going to start here with 1950. This is the most recent census that we can look at publicly, because we have to wait 72 years for the census to become public. Don't ask why, but don't say too much about it, because most countries you have to wait 100 years. So we're doing better than most countries. Yeah, the 1931 census in England will be coming out public soon. Or maybe it did, maybe it just did, I forget. So 1950 is the most recent one. Now, if you're looking for your own name, you can get that by writing to the government and saying you want a copy of your name on a census report. But as far as seeing the whole country or something, you got to wait 72 years. This one, borderline, can fit on an 8.5 by 11 page. It's still a little tiny to print, so just keep in mind as we get older, we don't need that much on our piece of paper, right? There's 30 people per page. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people that are going to get asked these extra questions at the bottom. Where your ancestors are going to fall, right? Yep, in between, I know. This happens to be my grandmother's family, and that's my grandfather on that yellow line. He not only got asked questions, but because he was the last one, he got asked even more questions than the other special people that got questions. Except he didn't give me any good information. So I just want to show you, I'm going to go through all the censuses from 1950 back to 1780 and just kind of give you an idea of what's on them, what they look like, so when you do see them on a computer or something, you won't be totally shocked. This one's pretty straightforward. This is a 1940. Again, big tabloid sheets of paper. Oh, there's only 2 people who got extra questions. 1, 2. Got the extra questions. Not much chance of my family ending up on one of those. So I've circled here in orange the little X's that are in a circle. That tells me who answered the questions. So my grandmother's on line 2. She answered the questions. My great-grandmother is on line 7 or something. She answered all the questions. That ought to be interesting because in the 1940s, my great-grandmother didn't speak any English. I know that because I have letters my uncle sent home from World War II that say, please read this to grandmother because I know she can't read the English. So who knows how she answered these questions. But, you know, that's okay. At least I know who answered. We've got the 2 people here that get the extra questions. And then here's the blow up. So right-hand side, left-hand side, this is my family. I don't mind showing my family blown up because I can say it's okay. I don't have to ask everybody on the page if it's okay to show their information. So Grandpa was a contractor. He was a builder. I knew that, but it's nice to see that that's his occupation. Great-grandpa's retired. Great-grandma and great-grandpa are marked as aliens. That doesn't mean they're green monsters with little antennae. It just means they're not citizens. Oh, but funny, on the 1930, they're marked as citizens. I told you, she can't speak English. I don't think she knew what she was answering, right? We have to put it in context. So they have, according to this anyway, they've never gotten citizenship in the United States. At this point, I think they've been here for about 50 years, so you would have thought maybe, but no. And then this right-hand side of the page, persons 14 years and older. My father and his younger brother didn't have to answer the questions because they were under 14. Don't think that just because it's blank, it doesn't mean, oh, they didn't know the answer or they just didn't feel like answering. Sometimes they're not required to answer. These are questions about work. Well, if you're under 14, you're supposed to be in school. So of course they're not going to ask you about where you work. So let's take a look at, whoops, did I miss something on that one? No. All right. 1930, again, we're asking for everybody's name, but now everybody gets asked the same questions. No special lines for anybody. And we've got, well, where are you born? Where was Dad born? Where was Mom born? We don't want to miss this part. Don't just look at that first column of names. We want to get all this neat information. So again, this is Grandma and Grandpa's family. Grandma's on the top line. And you notice that underneath her, her neighbor, Mr. Hardy here, he's got numbers. This other oh yeah, Mr. Herman, he was best friends with my grandfather. He's got numbers next to his, but Grandma doesn't have any numbers. No, because where's Grandpa? He's on the previous page. This is the page with Grandpa at the bottom. This is the page with Grandma at the top. When you see those numbers on the side, let me go back so they're a little bigger. The first column is, in numerical order, which house is this that I have visited today? So numbers 1 through however many you get to in a day. The next column is, what family in chronological order is this that I have visited? Now this is a very rural town in western Connecticut, 85, 85, 86, 86. These are single family homes. All right, I'm going to show you one later for an apartment building, and there's going to be a whole lot of people who only have one number, right? Because they're all in the same building. All right, so we looked at 30, oops. Okay, so one of the questions in 1930, and the questions do vary, but do you own or rent your home? If you own it, what's the value of your real estate? I always say mine's $1 million because maybe it's even more because it's my house and it's got all my stuff in it. I don't know what it's worth. So I'd be lousy at answering these questions, right? But if you go down through here, Grandpa owns his house. He says it's worth $10,000. His neighbor owns a house and he says it's worth $5,000. Then you got the next neighbor, oh, his is worth $12,000. You get a feel for the neighborhood? The houses are not cookie cutter, right? It's not factory housing or anything. Then we got people renting for $30 and $25 a month. Don't we wish? Right? But by looking at that information for a page or maybe 2 pages, you can get an idea of the neighborhood. What's it like? Are they all great big beautiful mansions? Is it, a slum place? Whatever. Somewhere in between for most of us, I would think. If you find that they own the house, well, now you've got a hint. I should go find the deed. Maybe they had a mortgage. Maybe I can find out who they bought it from, who they sold it to, all kinds of neat other stuff. And of course, they had to pay taxes on their house. So there's a whole other set of records that you can go look at that may tell you how they've improved the property over the years based on how their taxes changed. Because we know they don't stay the same. Another question in 1930 was, are you a veteran? Have you had military service? Well, look where this question is. It's way over at the right-hand side of the page. If you only look at the names on the left-hand column, you're going to miss all the good stories. Except, of course, on these pages, there was no veterans. I have a good idea why. I know why Grandpa was not a veteran. He worked at a boat building company. He never had to go to World War I because he was building boats. That was deemed more important than going to the war because they needed the boats built. So, again, if there was a yes there, I'd be looking for military documents, right? 1920, again, big piece of paper. Everybody's asked the same questions. But let's take a look at these questions about where were people born. Well, I've moved now back to where Grandma grew up. In the 1920s, she was just graduating high school. She lived in Maine. Do you notice too many people here that weren't born in Maine? Okay, you already know what this neighborhood looks like, right? Bunch of potato farmers. They live in Maine, a couple of them born in Connecticut, Massachusetts, but pretty much they're all local people, right? This can give you an idea, again, well, where did people come from? Are they in a neighborhood of common people? Do they have common backgrounds? 1910, you notice the handwriting's getting a little worse. But same kind of format, everybody's getting asked the same questions. This enumerator was so nice, they actually wrote the name of the road. I didn't need to know that because I've been on Chicopee Road. I already knew where that was. But it's nice that they followed the directions and wrote it down. The little hash mark down there at line 31 or whatever it is, 81 I guess, tells me that from the top of the page to that hash mark, it's Chicopee Road. I can go find a map now and I can look up where Chicopee Road is. This is up in Maine somewhere, so don't look for it around here. 1900, I don't know, my ancestors got on the last page, I guess, because it's half empty. They would never turn a page in like this unless it's the last page for the town. But let's look at, in this case on the 1900, on the very, very left column, it asks about a farm schedule. This is after it's asked you, do you own or rent? Do you have a mortgage? And is this a house or a farm? So you notice if you're looking down here, anybody who's got an F here, kind of a fancy F, there's a number next to it. This is one of the very, very few times that you will find U.S. documents that are actually connected, and they're going to tell you to go find another document. It's very, very rare in U.S. documents, much more common in European documents. So what they were doing in 1900 is one example. The government was taking an agricultural census, otherwise known as the farm census, because they needed to know if we could produce, as a country, enough food to feed everybody that was coming to America. It's kind of a nice concept, like let's make sure we can feed everybody before we let them in the door, right? We all do that when we're having a party, don't we? Make sure we have plenty of food. So when you see this, and it says here for this person's family, it's farm schedule 27. Well, it's not schedule 27, but it's line 27 on the farm schedule for this same town, county, and state. You will find all the information about that guy's farm. And if you want to see his neighbors, oh, they're on 26 and 28. You can look and find out all this great information. Of course, not all the agricultural censuses still exist. So it's a little hit or miss, but if you don't know to look for them, you won't know if they exist or not. So you definitely want to look for them. And here's the kind of information that you're going to find on them. This is not just, oh, Grandpa had 10 acres and he had cows and pigs. This is how many acres were improved and unapproved, what was the value, how many fences, how many people worked there, what did they grow that they used, what did they grow that they took to market. Oh, well, let me see here, do they have, how much cattle, did they slaughter any, did they make cheese, do they have lambs, were they purchased, were any of them slaughtered or killed by dogs, did they die of disease? They were tracking everything, these people. Did you clip and do something with the fleece from the sheep? So lots of information. Here's your poultry, what you had on hand, excluding your spring hatching. You didn't have to count those. Now your farm had to be a certain size to even qualify for this. So Grandma who had 2 chickens in the backyard is not going to be on the farm schedule, okay? But if they had a legitimate size farm, and it went by dollar values, which mean nothing at this point because, you know, it's old money, it was little numbers. But if you can find one of these, you can see that you can get a really interesting and big picture of what was going on your ancestor's farm. And they did these for at least 30, if not 40 years, you know, so 3 or 4 censuses that they did the agricultural ones for. All right, so 1890. This is just your warning. Don't even go looking for it if you're researching in New England. Paper and fire do not mix. Paper and the water that you use to put out the fire do not mix. This was before we ever had a National Archives. There was a big fire in DC because, you know, the British decided to attack our capital in one of the wars. Yeah. So very few parts of the 1890 census even exist, which is why I was so excited that my great-grandfather was born in 1879 and he made the 1880 census, because otherwise I wouldn't see him until he was 21 years old. That's kind of late. I want to know about his childhood, you know? So this is just your warning. Don't get too paranoid. Oh my God, I can't find it. I can't find it. You're not going to find it, all right? But there are plenty of other records you can use from the period of 1880 to 1900 to fill in gaps. So going backwards, the 1880 census, we're getting back to when they fit a little better on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. They're not asking as many questions. They haven't woken up yet about all these great things that they could find out from us. But on this one, I picked out, I said, well, they always asked about occupation. Sometimes they asked about your occupation and your industry. So we go through this one, we've got farmers, we've got women keeping house, we got people that are taking care of the stables, laboring, they're school teachers, and then we got one person who's a stone cutter. Good for him, I don't know. Maybe that's the highest paying job in town, I don't know. I have a census from this same area where everybody are farmers, and then there's my great-grandfather who's the electric trolley driver in Boston, even though he lives in Maine. Kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, and he doesn't even say trolley driver, it says conductor. So first I had to figure out, is that a music conductor or is it a train conductor? You know, got to give a little work to this. So if you find out what they're doing for work, right, now we've got whole nother avenues we can research. Did they have to get an apprenticeship? Did they have to get licenses? This is where our library becomes our best friend, because now we want to know the history of an occupation. What was it like to do this occupation at a given time, right? Was there a union or any other kind of trade organization that they would have belonged to that might have given them some kind of pension or security or insurance, helped them out when they couldn't feed the family or something, you know? So all kinds of things we can use as long as we read all the information. And some of them are going to be kind of obscure. Oh, yeah, he's a laborer. Well, all right, that doesn't really tell you much, except that he's out there getting his hands dirty, but we don't know what he's doing, right? And of course, all the women are keeping house, unless they're school teachers or running a boarding house. So 1870, we've still got all the people's names, but you can see we're getting less and less questions, right? Less and less data as we go backwards. So on here, I picked out to talk about some of these other things that are way over on the right-hand side. Education. Did you attend school within the year? Now, I also picked on this one in particular because this is the only census where they word this question in the negative. And they say, cannot read, cannot write. Every other census it says can read, can write. So if you've got yes, 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 then all of a sudden you hit this census and you see no's, it's not that they're stupid. The government's stupid. They word the question backwards. Because when you go back to the next one, it still says can read, can write. And it doesn't say English. It just says that they can read and can write. Okay? It does not specify a language. Are they deaf, dumb, blind, insane, or idiotic? Those terms do not mean what we think they mean today. All right? You need to look those up. You need to get out. Usually we recommend using Black's Law Dictionary because it will give you the definition at different times over the course of history. Typically, these also mean from birth. It's not the guy who got blinded in the foundry accident or something. It's the poor child who's been blind since birth. Now, just like there were censuses for the farms, there's censuses for all of these too. If you ever get a yes in that column, say, praise hallelujah, now hope that it still exists, because there's a different census for every one of those ideas. And it will give you all kinds of information on where they were cared for, how they were cared, who was paying for it. All the stuff that HIPAA does not allow you to learn today about living people, you can learn about the dead people if they were deaf, dumb, blind, insane, or idiotic. You know, they didn't know back then that we would want to know all this stuff. Now, what are we back to? 1870. All right, so 1870, we're getting a lot of immigrants in. We don't have a whole lot of people that were born here yet, right? We're still mostly in an immigration stage. And even if people are immigrating as families, children didn't get their own citizenship, right? They got citizenship because their father got citizenship, assuming they were younger, minors. So here's a couple on the 1870. If you've got male ancestors, again, make sure you're looking at that right-hand side of the page. Are you a male citizen, 21 years of age and up? You don't have to have been born here. It's just asking if you're a citizen 21 years and older. Now, of course, we know why they want to know that. This is how you prepare for war, is by knowing how many men you have that are 21 and over, or 15 and over if we get further back. Then we have this other one. Boy, one of these days I'm going to spend a whole day, I'm going to find somebody that's got a yes in this column. Are you a citizen of 21 years and older, male, whose right to vote is denied or abridged on grounds other than rebellion or crime? Because, boy, there's a story when you find somebody who's got a yes under there. All right? And that's what I'm saying. We've got to read all these columns. We've got to read the headings. We've got to look at, what could this possibly mean? I don't know. Why would you be denied your right to vote on grounds other than rebellion or crime? I guess, you have to be a really bad kid or something. I don't know. But I think it would be great to find one and figure out the story for it. All right, so if we keep going backwards, 1860, now this is the first time that all the people's names are listed. But again, no relationships, nothing to tell us who all these people are, and very little information on here. We know who they are, and that's about it. Oh, and 1850 depends, this is, I think, a boarding, this is a boarding house, so much less information. So I turn this one sideways, so again, we've got on this first line, it's house number 24, it's family number 30. They just lumped everybody in the boarding house in as one family. Probably not the right thing to do, but that's what they did. But the guy was nice enough to write that it's a boarding house. If your ancestors listed there, you know he's probably not related to all these other people that are in the building. Might be, but you don't have to spend a whole lot of time figuring out how they're all related. Now this one comes, I think, from Worcester. Again, we've got, it's building number 25, it's family 31 and 32. It's a duplex. I don't know if it's an up and down or a side by side, but I can sure tell you that family 31 has a lot more people than family 32. You know, we got 4 people here and we got, I don't know, like 12 or 15 people in the other side of the house. Those are the little clues that you want to see to say, oh, okay, what more can I squeeze out of this to get more story? All right, now we've gotten back to 1840. And this is where they turn into heads of household only, and you have a chart in your handout, because God forbid we could have any consistency here, right? If we look at the very first one, the 1790 census, they asked if you were a male, are you under 15 or over 15? And then they just wanted to know, are you female? Are you a free person who's not white, or are you a slave? That's not a lot of check marks. By the time they go 10 years later, well, now the males are split between, oh, they're under 10, 10 to 15, they're 16 to 25, they're 26 to 44, and they're 45 and over. If I was even close, I would have said I'm 44 and over because I don't want to be in another war. That would have been, I don't care, you can't make me prove it. So each one of these years, what is it, 6 different years that they did these hash mark things, they've changed the age brackets. So as you're going backwards in these, you have to kind of have an idea of how many kids are in the family, about how old are they, because as you're going to see next, all you're going to have are little hash marks to match up with these little brackets and whatever you know about the family. So let's take a look at some of these. These are also before the government actually provided a form, so the enumerator had to provide their own paper and pen. The government, however, would give them an ink blotter. How nice of them. So 1840, we've got a bunch of little hex marks. I think I got the red box around my 2 ancestors that are on here, but you know, you have to be a little careful. Maybe use a ruler to make sure you're reading straight across, hoping that they wrote straight across, right? There's no lines, so it's hard to tell. And that was the good one. They get a little worse. I lucked out here because my ancestor's at the top of the page. It's pretty easy to figure out which hash marks go to his name. Oh yeah, and I don't know if you can see this very clearly there, but this is one of those enumerators who must have known everybody in town. Well, what are we back to? 1830, it would have been a fairly small town. He wrote in all the names in alphabetical order before he talked to anybody. So I don't know whose neighbor is whose. I just know that my Andersons are going to always be at the top of the page because they were the first A name in town. Lots of times it was the town clerk who did the census, so, you know, they knew all the names because they had all the other records. 1820. Again, it's their own paper. They're making up their own columns. Well, I mean, they've got instructions, but they're made up their own columns. And again, it's like, oh, I don't think I'm reading it straight. I gotta, you know. I love the face, yes. But it gets worse. Here's 1810. Now, it's got the name of the city. Well, city, town. And again, I lucked out because the A's are at the top of the page. It's a little easier to go read across. 1800, same town. Oh, now I had to get to the B's, so I'm more in the middle of the page here. They've got 9 people in their family. And then 1790. This is 1, 2, 3, 4 across and 3 down on the same page, so this is 12 sets of people. It's probably the entire town on one piece of paper. I've never really compared it to see, I don't even know for sure. Well, yeah, this is a little tiny town in Maine, so it could literally be the entire town on 1.5 or something pages of paper. Now, if you have trouble reading things, they did have to tally, so if you trust that they got the math right, you know, you might want to look here and say, oh, well, there's a total of 12, so 1, 1, I think that's probably a 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, I don't know, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, so that adds up to 12, so maybe I read the writing right, you know. The more of these you work with, the easier they become to read. It's like any other set of records. The more you read the person's handwriting, the easier it is to know what they're saying. And of course, anything where you've got some math going on, at least it gives you a chance to double check the numbers and things. All right, so that's the first US Census, 1790. Country was getting bigger. Now, this is what a census form looks like if you go print it from one of the big genealogy sites, a blank form. It has everything nicely fit, nicely typed, so you can print it and you can read it. And you don't have to worry about, oh my God, I got to twist it and magnify it and all of this, you know. So these forms are readily available from Ancestry, Family Search, Find My Past, and probably 100 other places, the National Archives. So a lot of times if you see people that are doing census research, they have these forms printed, they'll come in the library and then they just write it in their own handwriting so that you just have to deal with the bad handwriting or someone else's handwriting once. And then it's your own chicken scratch you have to figure out. This is the same idea, one from the National Archives, so you can see that, you know, these things are printed in much bigger letters, easier to read than the old forms. So where are you going to find these? Ancestry.com. I went and looked. I saw you have Ancestry Library Edition. So that means you can come in the library and you can look these up for free. My favorite 4-letter F word. It's free. FindMyPast.com, which is also a membership site, it has them. Just about any genealogy research site is going to have the US Census because they know that we will pay for a subscription so we can look at something that is also available to us widely for free. We're not the smartest people sometimes. FamilySearch.org, that's the Latter-day Saints website, 100% free. They will ask you for an email and a password. In 15 years, they have never sent me an email that I did not ask for. They do not advertise. It is not like Ancestry, so just giving them your email and setting up an account is not a huge issue with them. Heritage Quest, I don't know if, can they use that with their library card? Heritage, oh, I think they've changed the name. So, yeah. So that's one you can use from home with your library card. And then, of course, historical societies. A lot of libraries have copies, especially of the older censuses, because they were published. The 1790 census for the entire United States is probably about this thick. For the entire United States. It's in many, many, many libraries, but most people overlook it because they just see it's a skinny little book. How can that be the whole United States? Well, there weren't that many states back then. And there weren't that many people here. And they only listed heads of family, so there's a lot of reasons it's a skinny little book. State archives are going to have copies. One of the reasons that these people had to make 3 copies was that one went to the state, one went to the federal government, and one went to the county government. So technically, for the first, I think it's 7 censuses, there should be 3 copies around. There probably are not, but there should be 3 copies if the people were saving them. All right, so once you've looked at the census reports, right, and each ancestor is probably going to be on maybe 5 or 6 of them, maybe a few more, but since we stop at 1950, you're going to get all these clues. Oh, they had this kind of labor, they did this, they had a house on this street, you know. These are all places that the census can lead you to go look for more information. Finding the immigration, finding the mortgages, finding cemetery information, military information. There's hints on all these census reports that could send you there, armed with some information, because most of the time if they asked about military, they asked you what war you were in. That's going to limit at least what records you have to look at. But town histories, town records, I noticed somewhere when I came in, I saw a sign about local history. That's a room that you'd want to be, looking at these kind of documents in and saying, well, what happened there? Did my aunts...
We've done a lot of work digitizing.
Great.
Quite a bit, so a lot of it's on our website under Southbridge History Resources, FYI.
Great. There's nothing like a good New England town report to learn something about your ancestor, because if they were the richest or the poorest, or they were skilled labor, they're probably in the town report. The rich people were paying to take care of the poor people, and the skilled laborers, they made all the fences and all the iron gates and all the things around town that needed to be done, all the barrels and everything, and they would have charged the town, which means it's in the report. We paid John Brown for 3 barrels to put out flowers or, whatever it was that they needed. All right, so read everything on the page. There's lots of stories in there to come out. Look at what might not be there, kind of like when you do your grocery list. Look at the report and go, well, what didn't they answer, or how did they answer it? It's not maybe an answer. And by all means, go looking for the instructions for the enumerators if you have questions. Sometimes what you think your ancestor lied about or totally misplaced was because of the enumerator's instructions. I believe it's the 1930 census, but it might be 1920. In the instructions, there's a whole chart. If the person says they were born here, write down this. Now, of course, because can any of you say exactly what was Poland and Ukraine and Czechoslovakia and all these, Eastern European countries, right, that got invaded, World War I, World War II, whichever one the census matches up with, it was hard to say, well, I was born here, but now it's this other country, and so they gave them a chart. If they say this, this is what you write. Your ancestor probably did not lie. Hopefully the enumerator followed the directions. And that's just how the government wanted to count everybody. So here's a little quick review of what I did for my great-grandfather. He was one of my babysitters until I was 10. Loved this man. Used to play on his veranda. I never figured out why somebody that was born in Connecticut called it a veranda, but it was always a veranda to Grandpa. So I went through and I found his census reports. Now again, no 1890 because it didn't exist, but I found them on the 1880 all the way through. Well, I have them on 1850 too. I found these, I read them, I took some notes. So the dates in here are the dates that they took the census, all right? June 18th is not the census date, but it's the date that the guy came to the house to ask the questions. And back then it would have been a guy, right? And I wrote down, okay, where was it taken? What's the information about Grandpa? Who's listed in the family? What else was going on? These were just my notes. They could be in whatever format you want, right? And then I wrote a story. I wrote the census story, which is not a complete story, all right? But I was able to start and say, well, okay, John William was born in Connecticut in February of 1879. He's the son of Charles and Sarah. He married sometime around 1901 to some woman named Meta, because the census does not give me her maiden name, even though I know what it is, but it's not on the census. Meta was born in New York. And then I was able to do, okay, 1880 and 1900, he's a little kid. I just did a sentence for each one. And then I did like a paragraph for each of the other censuses. And I ended by saying, here's all of his children and approximately when they were born, because the census has ages. It doesn't have birth dates always, every once in a while, but I have their ages. And then, of course, because he was a child on some of those, I could also start to write about great-great-grandma and grandpa, his parents, because I had some of their census reports. They were on the same ones, obviously, if they're his parents. So I was able to start that story. It's not a complete story, right? I said Grandpa's born in February of 1879. Well, I mean, he did like to party, but we did not celebrate his birthday for the whole month of February. You know, we had a date. I need to find it. So what writing the census story allows you to do is it allows you to then go back and look and say, well, what's missing? Well, I didn't have the exact date of birth for either of them. I didn't have great-grandma's maiden name from the census. I can see that they've moved around. Well, I wonder when they moved around. I know that in 1920 they were here, 1930 they're over here. That doesn't tell me when they moved, somewhere in those 10 years. So I start to make a list of what else do I want to know about these people? What didn't I get out of the census that I want to go research? And now I have a research plan, which means I can do better research because I can research very focused. And if I know that I am looking for the date and place of John Williams' birth, because I know he's born February 1879 in Connecticut, there's only so many records that are going to help me figure out the actual date. And the most obvious one, of course, is I need his birth certificate. Unfortunately, he didn't have a birth certificate until he was 65 years old. His parents had only been in the country for less than a year when he was born. I don't know that they knew they had to go to the town hall and record his birth. He recorded his own birth when he wanted Social Security. I get a much more elaborate birth certificate than I would have for anybody else who's born then, but it's all filled out by him. And he didn't know exactly where he was born. I mean, he knew the town, but there's no address. You know, like in that time frame, they would have been born at home. I would have been like, oh great, home address, I can find it on a map. No, he didn't know where he was born. By the time he figured out that he had a birth certificate, he probably lived in 4 different places by then. But with focused questions, I can focus my research. I can do a better job at answering new questions instead of always researching the same item and always getting the same answers, or hopefully the same answers as I'm building a story about my family. This makes some sense? Good, good. All right, whoops. Okay, well, it's your turn to talk. Ask questions.
Why is it that the government declassifies the census data? Why does it take so long? You said in England it's 100 years, here it's
72.
72, now why?
When they made the rule, the thinking was, oh, by 72, most of the people on the census will be dead.
But what good is that?
Well, then you're not invading their privacy.
Oh, okay.
Because those were heads of household only. So it was always the oldest person that's listed. So if you're listed as already being a full-grown adult, whatever number that equates to, and you know, it's different in the 1790s than it is in the 1890s or 1990s. You know, in 72 years, yeah, you're probably not there anymore. Like I said, I'm not telling the government. You know, I like that I get these every 10 years and they're only 70 years old and not 100. Yeah, there's all kinds of crazy things that go on in other countries. I mean, there's a census in England that doesn't exist because they ran out of paper during one of the world wars and they used the backs of all the census reports as their paper. That was all they had. I've never lived in a war zone, so I don't know what that's like. I can't appreciate, you know, how little they would have had and what's going on, but I can understand why they did it. I will never understand the one why England decided one year they told their enumerators round everybody's age to either a 0 or a 5. Good to say that to anybody. I know it's not for genealogy, but that's what I want to use it for, and it doesn't help me if everybody's age ends in a 0 or a 5. But so every country has different rules, and it's one of the things, you know, if you're going to do research outside the US, you have to understand what those rules are and what's their process for taking the census. In England, and also therefore in Canada for a long time, everybody filled out the census the same day. It's 1 page per family. You fill it out and you turn it in, because that night somebody comes knocking at your door and asks you for it. None of this like, oh, we'll send it to you 2 months in advance. You can send it back. And, you know, is there any wonder that our censuses are not accurate? I mean, if you get the census a month and a half in advance and you fill it out, you're not filling it out as of the census date, because the census date hasn't come yet. So it's automatically going to be potentially out of date, depending on what else is going on in your life. So, you know, there's no perfect system, and we have to live with the fact that we have what we have. Well, I mean, the first census was taken only to find out how many men did we have for the next army, and how many people, you know, had to be represented in Congress. So there's very few questions, because what do you need to know to answer that? You need to know how many men are 15 or older, and, you know, whatever, but that's about it. And it was only the heads of household that were eligible for representation, so that was enough. It's a lesson, every one of these types of documents, as you go through them over the years, it's a lesson in how our government grew up, how the country grew up, and, you know, what we learned over time. And then, of course, well, 1850 is about when they started to get some tabulating equipment and things like that, you know, the very early, what they called computers, nothing like what we have today. Because there was one census that was done on punch cards. Like, they got all the censuses in and then they put them on punch cards and put them through to get all the information. Now, next time we take a census, which is still, what, another 5 years away, 2030, about maybe a year after you fill out your census, you can actually go get information from the census. The statistics are out there. It's just the actual data that you can't see. But it only takes them about a year to get the initial statistics done, which is why it's like a year later that you find out, oh, your congressional district is changing, or, you know, whatever, you get different representation. But at that point, they can tell you, oh, yes, in this part of the country, it's now, you know, 42% French Canadian, where 10 years ago it was 52% or whatever it was, you know. Very generic kinds of statistics you can get any old time about the censuses. And you can learn a lot about a community and things that way, besides living there and actually reading the histories and stuff. But so thank you for being here, and thank you to the Cultural Council for supporting the program tonight. We have one regional genealogical conference in New England every other year, and it's coming up in October. It's in Manchester, New Hampshire. We have a great time for 4 days. Before the pandemic, we would get 1,000 people for 4 days, and we do nothing but talk genealogy. And nobody's eyes glaze over. It's amazing. Nobody gets bored, you know. We all want to hear about great-grandma's stories and all of that. So if you're interested in the conference, it's October 29th to November 1st in Manchester, New Hampshire. So there's some brochures there if you're interested. Thank you to everybody who was watching online and whoever watches later on cable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.